I'll introduce our first speaker, John Adams, who is, I'm sure, well known to many of you. He's a local historian and museologist and author. He worked in the field of museums and historic sites in BC and in Ontario for over 30 years, and taught museum studies at SFU and UVic. He now operates his own company called Discover the Past, which gives really interesting tours of Victoria and offers other heritage services. So please join me in welcoming John Adams.
Well, good morning, and thanks very much, Ben, for that. And just following up on what Josephine said, I don't know how many of you have noticed the spindle whorl that was designed by her cousin, Butch Dick, just on the other side of Pandora Avenue from City Hall. It's an interesting thing. It looks like a sundial, perhaps, but if you look closely, it and the other seven in total, around Victoria, downtown Harbour, include the names in Lekwungen of what used to be there. And in the case of the area around Centennial Square, they had determined that the name was Squatunilich, which is a reference to the wild cherry trees that used to be there. We should probably get Josephine's granddaughter to teach us all how to pronounce some of these things, because they are very, very important. So I'm just going to step aside over here. Maybe not, because the microphones are over here, aren't they? Okay, so I won't do that. But we do have Centennial Square. We all know Centennial Square, I'm sure, and I have a very personal relationship to it. I was 11 when I moved to Victoria in 1960. We lived downtown for a bit and then close by, and I watched closely as Centennial Square was developed. I saw it as it was before, and then it emerged like this in the mid-1960s. And you can date this photograph because the Johnson Street Bridge in the distance is in the up position. We'll find out more about how Centennial Square came to be, but my job is really to talk a little bit more about what was there before. So this is kind of what's in downtown now, an aerial picture from 2020. Try to spot Centennial Square in this maze of streets. You can see the arena up in the upper left-hand corner. So we'll just help you out. There's a red circle around the area, roughly, that is Centennial Square. But it kind of blends in with the rest of downtown. So let's turn the clock back a little bit farther. 1947. The BC aerial surveys have wonderful photographs online. This is one of them. And they were very high-resolution pictures, and so it's easy to blow them up and see the details. So again, we have the Johnson Street Bridge in the foreground, and we don't see the arena because it wasn't built yet, but we can see the Hudson's Bay Company store, now the public market and the Bay condominiums, the big building in the upper left-hand portion of the picture. But where's Waldo? Where's Centennial Square? Right there. Again, kind of hidden away, blending in with the buildings to the west, near the harbour, and to the south in what is now the Old Town area. So let's turn the clock back even more. Don't worry, we're not going to go back all the way to the beginning of time, but 1870s, this wonderful picture was taken from the old Driard Hotel. Most of us probably know it better now as a piece of the Bay Centre, the part that they took down and put back. But this was looking north. From there, you can see Calls or Mount Douglas in the upper right, just to the right of 1870s. The church steeple on the left is no longer there. That was the Wesleyan Methodist Church, corner of Pandora and Broad Street. It was replaced in 1890 with Metropolitan Methodist, later Metropolitan United, and now the Conservatory of Music. So downtown was largely wood at that time. Let's see what happens a little bit later. Just a few years later, 1878, if you look closely at this picture, which is looking north on Douglas Street, from the cross street that you see in the center of the photograph is Pandora Avenue. And the picture was actually taken when they were laying the cornerstone for the Masonic Temple, corner of Fiskard and Douglas. But what took my interest the most was the pile of bricks on the left-hand side, just directly underneath the numbers 1878. What are those pile of bricks for? That's where City Hall is. Those bricks, I'm positive, were stockpiled to construct the first wing of City Hall. So let's look at it a little bit more. Eventually, City Hall was built, and in this photograph, it was just a small building. The frontage is along Pandora Avenue. The original City Hall was just the part on the right-hand side. The part with the tower on the left was added a bit later for the fire hall. They hung their fire hoses in that tower, and there was a bell up there just in case they needed to call the firefighters in. City Hall eventually expanded a little bit more to its present configuration, and so that area was going to be really the center of the city. Not the commercial center so much, because that was centered mainly on Government Street and the area now Bastion Square. It later moved up to Douglas Street, but generally the south end of the city, close to what is now the Bay Center. The city probably decided to build City Hall to the north of the commercial center because the land was cheaper. And when they decided to build a city market, they were criticized for not having built it closer to the center of the commercial part of town. They built it again where the land was cheaper, and that was right beside City Hall. But in order to build it, they pulled down a big chunk of Chinatown. And so this is the Victoria Public Market as it was when it opened in 1891. Beautiful building, as you can see. Later, it was decided that it would serve other civic purposes, and so they moved in the fire hall. This was Fire Hall number 1. Only to be replaced in the late 1950s when they built the building on Yates Street across from the Central Middle School playground, and that's since been replaced as well. These fire trucks, fire wagons, are facing out onto onto Cormorant Street. Names get a bit confusing because Cormorant Street and Pandora later blended into one. So that same photograph I showed earlier, 1947, from BC aerial photographs, but now a close-up just of the area around Centennial Square. Of course, it wasn't called Centennial Square yet. So there's the public market that we just looked at. The street that is in front of it is Cormorant Street. And you can see in the upper right the City Hall. And City Hall was separated from the public market by Cormorant Street. And Pandora Avenue is to the right of City Hall. Behind City Hall, in a tight little block between Pandora and Cormorant, was a gas station. This one. You can see the public market in the distance. And you can see the Victoria Tent Factory. That was basically at the back door of City Hall. This gorgeous building was built in the 1880s. It was the Tai Yuen Opium Factory. And Pandora Avenue on the right ends at Government Street. Cormorant Street, to the left, continues all the way down to Store Street and the E&N railway station. So it was just the block was like a piece of pie. This is the thin end of the pie, but the building was quite beautiful. But over time, it begins to suffer, as many of the buildings do in downtown Victoria. And so by 1950, Capital Iron, which up until then had been scrapping ships, decided to open a surplus shop in that building. Some of you might know Ron Green. He worked there when he was a young man. And 1963, well, a Chinese restaurant has moved into the lower area, and the building is looking maybe a little seedier. And so it was just around this time that people at City Hall decided that something should be done to spruce up the area. But a few more buildings that get involved in the development of Centennial Square. The Pantages Theatre. Most of us know it today as McPherson Playhouse. It went through many name changes, the Empire, the York, and so on. Never did fairly well. It was empty for some years. So the former Pantages Theatre is shown here with the arrow. Look to the right, those two buildings. Where are they? Well, they're gone now. The lobby of the McPherson Playhouse occupies most of that site. But if you look to the left of the theatre, there's another building. I've got a picture of that too. Here it is. I remember this one quite well because there was a corner store I stopped in a couple of times on a hot day like this for a pop. Upstairs was the Wong's Association. But going up to Douglas Street, the Commercial Hotel, a very elegant hotel, on the corner where the Downtown Victoria Business Association offices have been. Beautiful place, a bar coming into town, you might stop for a drink. It was looking a bit seedy by 1935, and the buildings to the right of it had been taken down. Just around the corner on Cormorant Street, you can see on the far left the building that was the market and the fire hall. But Hua Yun and Company in 1900 had Thomas Hooper design a magnificent set of buildings. It was designed to look like several buildings. Edwardian classical buildings to the left and right, and in the middle, recessed balconies, very typical of Chinatown. And on what is now Fiskard Street, to the left in this picture is what was the police department and is now the part of the building for the Capital Regional District. But look at these beautiful buildings, the Chi Kung Tong, the Chinese Freemasons. This was another Teague building, John Teague building, and a beautiful thing. It was decided to take that down and many others. So we have 1947, Victoria's Chinatown is perhaps looking a little seedier. Buildings are getting old, and in 1961, a prof from UBC was visiting Victoria doing interviews with old-timers in Chinatown, and in his private notes, which he never intended anyone to see, but they just happen to be now in an archives. So I was quite amazed when I came across this statement of his, that his conclusion after visiting Victoria's Chinatown a couple of times was that it was a dilapidated, colorless, decaying slum. And the area of Chinatown that is now Centennial Square was included in this description. So no wonder they decided to do something. But this is before a Centennial Square idea was hatched. What are they going to do to clean up this area? They're going to tear down that wonderful building that was built for the public market. How come? Well, it never was a financial success because probably it was in the wrong spot and people were getting in cars and driving out to the new supermarkets in the suburbs. Wouldn't it have been neat if they had left that? But they needed parking, and so they got rid of it before any real planning began. This is a picture from 1959, just on the eve of the decision to do a little bit more. So they've knocked down the public market. What else are they going to do? Well, we'll hear about that as some of our next speakers in turn tell us how Centennial Square came to be. So there'll be time for questions afterwards, but our next speaker is up, and so probably, Ben, are you going to introduce? Okay.
Thank you, John, and I'd like to add that John will also be leading some tours of Chinatown almost immediately after this. He's got a very busy schedule today, and I think, is it 1:30, John, the tours are starting? They're full. Okay, well, they're full, so there we go. Hopefully some of you have booked your spot with those tours, with the tour today, and if not, there will be more, I'm sure, throughout the course of the summer and onwards. So our next speaker is Pam Madoff. As a long-serving member of Victoria City Council, Pam was particularly involved with architectural design, urban planning, and heritage restoration and rehabilitation. She continues to participate as a community activist in these areas in particular. Please join me in welcoming Pam Madoff.
And this will be foolproof, right, Ben? Yes, it's foolproof. Well, it's thrilling to see so many people here this morning. Thank you so much for coming. When the time was changed from an evening to a morning session, I had suggested maybe we should change to a pajama party theme because I know there were some festivities last night for folks who were involved with Design Victoria. So for those of you who got up and out on this beautiful day to come and join us, thank you so much. So the perspective that I wanted to speak to today is really based on the experience that I had as one of the people producing the book Test of Time. Test of Time was produced in 2012, and it was a collaboration between Don Luxton, the very well-regarded heritage consultant, and the Victoria Civic Heritage Trust, which is the organization that is funded by the City of Victoria to assist in the rehabilitation of historic commercial buildings. And we decided that it would be useful to tell the story of City Hall, but primarily without the politics. It's really the story of the building and the surrounding land and what has happened over the years. And so we produced Test of Time, and the chapter that I volunteered to research, which I enjoyed tremendously, was who were the players? How did this happen? Having been on council for so long, I know how long it takes to make simple things happen. And so what were the factors that came together to create such an extraordinary project, such as Centennial Square, which went on to enjoy international acclaim? So to say it was a bold new vision would be putting it mildly. This is one of the illustrations from the book that I particularly love. It's a detail of the water feature in the fountain splashing up against the mosaics. And to say that it was bold would be something of an understatement. And the factors that came together and the people who were involved, I can't imagine how else it could have happened. And so I wanted to do an examination of the role of each of the players. And these are just little snapshots. And I'm hoping that if you're interested in any of the particular practitioners, that you might do some research on your own. Most of them could warrant an hour-long presentation just on them and their practice. So I called them the Dream Team. And when you've ever tried to get anything done at the civic level and it does get done, it does seem like a dream when it actually does happen. And this particular illustration shows the first model for Centennial Square. Basically, what was built in terms of the form, character, and the spatial concepts, a few changes. But one of the things that really impressed me as well about the Dream Team was how hands-on they were. And this model was actually constructed by Rod Clack, who was the city's first director of planning, and by Alan Hodgson, who was one of the architects involved with the square. And the more that I talked to people, I discovered what a sort of community effort it was, where even the families would get involved. And when we get onto the monoliths in the fountain, that I'll talk to various people, the wives of some of the practitioners and other family members who were down actually, attaching the mosaics. And when money was running short on models, some of the practitioners were doing it on their own time as well to make sure that this project could keep moving forward. But you have to sort of start at the top. And what is the civic leadership? And Mayor Richard Wilson was on the development committee for the University of Victoria. And one of the things that sometimes is a little hard to remember or to even be aware of was how much was new and happening in Victoria at that time. The University of Victoria was under construction. And the amount of work that was being done citywide and region-wide by the Department of Public Works as well was quite extraordinary. And as you'll discover, some of the practitioners had actually been or were still working for the Department of Public Works, working on other major civic and regional projects as well. But when you read the statement from Mayor Wilson, to hear him saying to enhance that which is worthwhile in the old and blend it in with the new, that was such an important almost motto, because what eventually we'll see is a blending of the heritage buildings with cutting-edge new architecture. And this was the first time this had happened literally in North America. So to say that we were cutting edge and recognizing the value of bringing those two styles of architecture together would certainly be an understatement. So the other factor that came into this was Mayor Wilson being on the development committee at UVic. The architecture firm that was consulting on UVic was a firm from the Bay Area of San Francisco, Worcester, Bernardi, and Emmons. And Mayor Wilson became particularly close friends with Don Emmons. And heritage conservation as part of urban renewal was one of the foundational principles of that particular firm. So without that, we could have had other firms coming to town who very much practice what I call the scorched earth approach, is you clear everything out and you start new. And so for us to have that incredible opportunity for those two principles to be brought together by a firm that actually practiced that. And if you're familiar with San Francisco, you might be familiar with Ghirardelli Square. That was happening at literally almost the same time, and it was that firm that was doing it. So that was the first festival marketplace that was constructed in the US. The next one after that would be Faneuil Hall in Boston. And again, the practitioners who were communicating with each other included Ben Thompson, who was one of the great urbanist practitioners as well. And to have that kind of international thinking being brought to our little town is so extraordinary. And I really can't think of another occasion since then when that has happened. So Ghirardelli Square opened in 1964. So we're right in that period. I had a chance when I was doing my research to read the correspondence between Don Emmons and Mayor Wilson. And it was so fascinating because it was somewhat new to Mayor Wilson, this concept. And he would say in his letters to Don, you know, one day he said, I wake up and I think this is absolutely the way to go. And then I start thinking about it, you know, is it the right way to go? And how am I going to sell this to council? But he went through it all, and with the help of the models and the other people who were involved and the great advice from Don Emmons, he presented the overall master plan to council in June of 1962. And if you can imagine such a thing, it was unanimously supported. With the astronomical budget, the total budget, $1.9 million. But it was, one thing that I certainly became very aware of as I became more aware of the work that Mayor Wilson had done, even he was only mayor from 61 to 65, was that he had a deep interest in urbanism. He had a really deep interest in city building, and he had an open mind. And he was there to learn, and he learned so much from Don Emmons and his experience at UVic. And when I look back over the trajectory of my experience, either on council or just as a very interested citizen, it's not often that you get a mayor with a real interest, like a real passion for urbanism. And I think, I may stand to be corrected, I can only think of two that I'm aware of throughout the history of Victoria. And one would be Mayor Wilson, and the other would be Mayor Peter Paulin. And again, that was someone who traveled, he saw world examples, and under Mayor Paulin, there were land use policies that were brought in place that really played a huge role in shaping the form and character of the city. And it was Mayor Paulin, as well with his council, that created the Government Street pedestrianized area, and came back with pictures from things that he'd seen in Europe. Like, what about this for people? And how about where people will sit here? And to have that leadership at the top is just so, so important. He was only mayor for 2 terms, 71 to 75 and 81 to 85. But I know when I first came on council, it was the one mayor's name I kept hearing. And part of what he did was the downzoning of Victoria. When James Bay was being demolished, hundreds and hundreds of houses coming down in favor of high-rises. The downzoning, which stayed in place for so long as we really practiced high-density, low-rise was the direction that we went in. So the legacy between the two of these folks is really incredible. So high level, you've got a mayor who's very involved and very engaged to lead this forward. And then, literally, the icing on the cake. This is Thomas Shanks McPherson, and he was a very interesting gentleman. He led a very, very quiet life, mainly was an investor, And when he passed away, he left everything to public institutions. And he'd been doing that throughout his life, making donations as well. And when I read this statement from him, it just was so moving. Imagine anyone talking about enhancing the beauty of the city. I'm just finding the word beauty doesn't get used that much anymore. We're talking about utility and all of those things, but to benefit the citizens. And I don't think many people remember or are aware of Mr. McPherson, but with the city alone, he had a very clever investment plan where they were given the endowment, but they had to wait a certain amount of time before they could start to actually access it. And by the time that they were able to access it, it was equal to $3 million in our dollars, with a similar bequest to UVic. So if you're familiar with the McPherson Library, well, that's Thomas McPherson. The Downtown Y, again, was enabled through a donation by Mr. McPherson. And of course, the McPherson Theater, which he actually owned. So in addition to the financials, he also donated property. So already you've got this incredible sort of team beginning to sort of coalesce, with the mayor very interested in these kinds of issues, the financing being supported by someone as philanthropic as Mr. McPherson. So then that's when you start to roll forward. And this is when you start to put the team together based on the model that we saw that Rod Clack had created with others. That who are the practitioners? And one of the things that I found so interesting as I was going through this as well is how many of them actually were British born, coming here for the opportunities that existed within the development world as well, and many of them involved with public works. So the first one was Bob Siddall, and his firm was tasked with the renovation of the existing City Hall building. And you can see in these photos some of the original features, some of the spaces that they had to deal with. But he was also a consulting architect at UVic. So you begin to see these connections being made. His firm primarily produced certainly homes, but a lot of schools and office buildings. And within that renovation, there was another architect named Ray Goldsworthy who was also involved. A lot of folks worked through Bob Siddall's office because it was such a busy, very prolific office. And the next architect, John Wade, who many of you may be aware of, again, English born and bred, and coming here and working on, again, when you have to remember how raw things really were and what sort of public institutions are yet to exist, he also was involved with UVic. So again, you can imagine the relationships that were being created. His firm designed the Saanich Municipal Hall, the Victoria Airport, many schools, and the Pacific Forestry Center, which won a Governor General's Award. So you can see this sort of mass of talent coming together with different areas of expertise that would be brought to bear on this project. So his particular part was the City Hall Annex, which you see just off to the right in this particular image. And I just wanted to talk a little bit from my firsthand experience, having spent 25 years in that annex, in my office or in the council chamber. One of the reasons we called the book Test of Time was because of what had survived the test of time. It didn't matter how many times I went into that building, I still absolutely marveled at the architecture, at its capacity, even through the decades, to handle large meetings. The quality of the finishes are extraordinary, like solid core mahogany doors and bronze fixtures. And then you look at things like the screen that's behind the mayor's chair. Well, that was a donation from someone as well. So there was a community spirit that was involved that created this this incredible space. So I think I've been leaning on here. So that doesn't look like John Wade at all. That looks more like John Wade. Fingertip control. So with this image, The one at the bottom especially is what became the new foyer for City Hall. And the beauty of that circular staircase never ceased to take my breath away. It is so exquisite, and even the hardware, they're like brushed pistons coming up. And at the top, you can see this very deeply coffered ceiling that is throughout the entire annex. And when you think about, how buildings change and what happens through happenstance, I was coming out of my office one day, everybody had pretty much cleared out, and I came out into the council chamber, and there was a gentleman there with ladders and very large cardboard boxes. And I thought, oh, wonder what he's doing. And of course, as a member of council, you can't give instructions to anybody, so all I could say was, gee gosh, what are you doing? And he said, oh, somebody complained it's too hot in here. So we're going to install Casablanca fans in each of the coffers. And I just thought, oh no, what am I going to do? I can't tell him to stop. And I ran downstairs, and fortunately the city manager was there, and he was not aware of it either. And thank goodness he came up and said, stop. But you can imagine this ceiling is exquisite, and the level of design detail, absolutely amazing. In the top photo, you can see the south-facing facade of the annex with, the contemporary version of bay windows. And again, mid-century modernism still responding to the heritage architecture, but in a very contemporary way. And you can see there that on the bays, as well as on the structure to the right, they have beautiful brise soleil to offer sun protection, which really, really works. So again, it's very practical, it's very beautiful. Well, shortly after I came on council, the one to the right was taken down in order to allow for some seismic upgrading. And I kept waiting for it to come back and waiting for it to come back and waiting for it to come back. And then I finally made an inquiry, and I heard that Public Works had decided it was too much of a nuisance to clean it, so it had just been sort of tossed aside in the Public Works yard. So when you think about how buildings can suffer, death by 1,000 cuts, we could have lost that. We could have had the Casablanca fans. So I don't go into City Hall a lot these days, but when I do, I'm always looking for, oh no, like what else could happen? Maybe with the best of intentions, but this design, in terms of its function and its materiality, is absolutely unbelievable. And to see how visionary it was at that time as well, just was a source of inspiration for me. So the next person we'll talk about is Alan Hodgson, someone I was fortunate to get to know very well. And again, he combined skills with both heritage and contemporary architecture. He was responsible for the first restoration of the Parliament buildings, but he was also working at UVic, and he designed both the music building and the education buildings there. Many private commissions, single-family homes. I think the one that I probably appreciate the most, he designed a studio for Elsa Mayhew, who was a leading artist here who exhibited at the Venice Biennale. And that studio building is an exquisite building overlooking Fisherman's Wharf. And next to it is a 19th century house that she also had, sort of home and studio. And again, when I was on council, those buildings were slated for demolition, as a developer would be rewarded if they took them down, put in a waterfront walkway, and then put up a condo or something. So miracle of miracles, through the Mayhew family, we still have that incredible little enclave that's all that's sort of left around Fisherman's Wharf. And one of the finest examples of Alan Hodgson's work. Another one of his, which I go by with my fingers crossed on a regular basis, it's in an area of a lot of high value, is on Crescent Road, just past Gonzales Beach. There's a beautiful one-story building, waterfront, that was built for a doctor. And I just don't know how long it can survive. But when you see something like that, so beautiful, so elegant, but when across the street we're seeing single-family homes going up that are sort of the size of boutique hotels, it's hard to imagine. But the point I'm really trying to make is the breadth of the experience of the practitioners who came to this project. So for Alan, he was charged with the McPherson Theatre. And you can see that at the bottom left. And so he went to England to check out the models for the festival theatres. And one of the things that he came back with in order to, how do you make a theatre financially sustainable, is that you actually, and you can see in the right-hand image, the pod at the upper left, is you attach a restaurant and bar, and that's going to be part of your revenue flow. Well, unfortunately, that was one thing, that was a step too far for council of the day. They just thought they could not promote drinking alcohol. And so it was slightly encumbered by, you couldn't go and have a glass of wine when you went to the theater. You could go for dinner, but that was going to be it. I think you can see in the bottom left the importance of the solids and voids in mid-century modernism, and Alan was a master of that. And the only intervention that's happened there was, I think they were finding the box office a bit stuffy, and again, without any real consultation on the back wall of the box office, which again is part of that overall design, they just went in and sort of punched a hole and put 3 little windows in it. And I know in talking to Alan, it was like, you know, knife in the heart time when you have a design that is so carefully thought through. But he stayed involved with that building right up to the end of his life. And I was on the facilities committee, and if you needed anything, when we were redoing things, he could track down the original wallpaper, he could track down the original carpeting. And I think it shows how important that work was to those practitioners. And I know I was quite excited when, at one point, again with the best of intentions, some local person donated a huge chandelier to go into the lobby of the McPherson, not the original lighting. So they took down the original lighting, and we had this giant chandelier. And then one of the staff in the basement discovered the original light fixtures. So we were so excited, we're going to surprise Alan, we're going to have the light fixtures back up. Very simple, beautiful ones. And he came and he looked at me and he says, "No, they're hung at the wrong height." So the ladders came back out and we readjusted the lights. And now every time I'm in Centennial Square and I look at that wall of glass and these shimmering light fixtures, I always think of Alan. The next project, slightly more utilitarian, but at least it kept one of the heritage buildings. This is the original police department. And so the firm of Wag and Hamilton, who did a lot of institutional work, were charged with an expansion that would include more of the functions that are required in a jail situation, but keeping the facade of the building. And David Hamilton in particular had come from England. He also had that balance of contemporary architecture as well as historic. He'd worked on the Crystal Garden renovation that turned it from a pool into the conservation center, and the Oak Bay Marina restaurant building, which is now sitting empty, waiting for its next use. But really happy to say that Oak Bay Council commissioned a statement of significance for the Oak Bay Marina building. And one of the comments that I made is I think it's one of the finest examples of British festival architecture west of Stratford in Ontario, and that we need to celebrate it in that way. So again, it's that wonderful combination of skills and interest. Now, Clive Campbell was somebody I didn't know very much about, but he was the chief architect for a number of years, again at the Department of Public Works, and he was the deputy minister of Public Works as well. So you can imagine the relationships that were created and the conversations that would have taken place. One of his first major tasks was in the aftermath of Government House burning down. It was to design and have constructed the replacement for Government House. And I was wondering what the time sensitivity might have been, and was it really pressured? Well, apparently it was, because Princess Margaret was coming to visit. And so she would need to have a place to stay. It would have to be a new government house. So he had quite a bit of pressure, I think, in that particular position. But then he moved into private practice, and the building that you see here is the senior center that was created as part of Centennial Square. found it quite an interesting building, quite different from some of the other ones, but it functioned extremely well. And the other thing that I found that he had done, and again, depending on what your familiarity is with Victoria, if you remember what was once called, the fabulous 700 block of Yates Street, well, when they decided to create covered walkways over the sidewalks and create an outdoor-indoor shopping mall, that was Clive. That was one of those things. And so it survived for quite a long time. But the thing about those is it basically decapitates the buildings. So you end up with the main floors turning into shop fronts that don't relate at all to the upper stories. So if you go to Yates Street now with the canopies gone, you'll see that those are actually intact buildings speaking as a unit architecturally rather than just feeling like you're in a mall going along the street. So I talked about how some of these practitioners would warrant a 60-minute production or an exhibition. Well, John DeCastry's already had the exhibition. We're just waiting for Chris Gower to write the book about John DeCastry, and we'll be ready to go. Again, when you think of the caliber, so many of these sort of young architects, the passion that they brought to it, the principles, the experience, and the vision that they brought to it. John was actually born in Victoria, and he too worked for the Department of Public Works. And then he went off to the University of Oklahoma, where he studied for 3 years under Bruce Goff. Bruce Goff often connected with Frank Lloyd Wright. And John came back with all of that experience and training and created some of the finest mid-century modern buildings in the city, both residential and commercial. The ones that you might be most familiar with, he created one of the trend houses as part of the Trend House program. That house still stands on Richmond up near Camosun College. The CNIB building on Douglas Street, on Blanchard Street behind what was the Bay Parkade. And when you see pictures of it at the time with the cars of the day in front of it, it really does look like the spaceship has landed. But he was such an adept and skilled practitioner that too has withstood the test of time. And although it has been changed as well, and that whole issue of solids and voids have changed, at least it is still standing. One of the most beautiful buildings that he did was the McCall's Funeral Home on Johnson Street. Most of that has now been demolished. One section of it is to be incorporated into a new condominium development. And again, it's a question of, do you try to preserve something, even a fraction, or do you think about, a decent burial? And we won't know until we see how it actually works. But that was one of the most interesting, complex building designs that he did in the city. At UVic, again, the UVic connection, he'd also designed the Interfaith Chapel, which is one of the most beautiful contemplative spaces in the region. His responsibility at Centennial Square was the parkade and the retail concourse. And that might sound very utilitarian, but in the hands of someone like Mr. DeCastry, you can see how something as utilitarian as the stairway becomes a lantern light well. So not only do you feel safe when you're in, and you get these fabulous views of the square, but also when you're in the square, you've got this lit feature that just makes you get that sense of animation. And again, something as utilitarian as concrete block, but when you see what happens with shadow and light, it's quite extraordinary. And that's when you start to see this as an entire composition working together. All of the color palette in the square was all very much earth tones. And again, best of intentions, 1 year Public Works are told to paint the parkade. And I have a feeling it might have been when the TV series Miami Vice was at its height, which might explain pink and blue. And so, these kinds of changes, they do start to denigrate the square as a whole over time. And there's been a lot of changes like that one. And then moving on to the incredible Clive Justice and his firm, Muirhead, Justice and Webb. He was tasked with the overall landscape design of the square, and he was one of the first registered landscape architects in the province. So again, we have to keep being mindful. This is early days for all of these things to be happening and for all of these practitioners to be working. Some of his greatest accomplishments include the Park and Telford Gardens, North Vancouver, and the UBC Botanical Garden. So you can imagine, here we have landscape done by someone at that level, the UBC Botanical Garden. And we have tinkered with it, and we've done all kinds of things to it, and now we're considering taking out the heartbeat of it with the fountain itself. And I just think you need to know this to make informed decisions about the future of the square. But Clive was quite a character. He'd be seen in the square doing the planning, usually wearing cowboy boots and a cowboy hat. And I remember talking to somebody who'd worked with him, and he said, you can remember talking with Clive and talking about 1/64th of an inch in terms of what the grade should be in order to get the right sense of change of grade as you move down towards the bowl of the fountain itself. One of the things that he did, I don't know that we do it quite as much now, is using mature trees and bringing them in at that stage. And they're in the DVD documentary about a townscape rediscovered. There's a shot of the truck coming up Douglas Street with a huge tree that had been removed from Beacon Hill Park and brought into Centennial Square. So that might be considered politically incorrect now, but you sure got a great result. But again, in terms of the interconnectedness, another truck showing a huge ginkgo tree being brought down from Mayor Wilson's mother's house. So I think you can't overstate the sense of community that was created through this endeavor. And then finally, we'll move on to the two final team members. Again, you can see this is a shot showing what was the Knott Garden in Centennial Square. All the bricks that you were seeing there were all recycled from some of the demolished buildings. So you instantly had this wonderful sense of patina. So Jack Wilkinson, here we go. Here's the fountain that many of us are so anxious to retain. And again, it's the skill and experience and gift that so many of these practitioners had. He was a staff artist and senior architectural draftsman with the Department of Public Works, and he actually wrote the first arts policy for the Department of Public Works. And he managed the art bank, which was the beginning of the provincial art collection, and he oversaw the addition of 600 pieces of work being added to the provincial art collection. He was also involved with the Royal BC Museum, and in that building, there were wonderful light fixtures that looked like inverted fir trees, stained glass, absolutely exquisite. They went all through the building. Unfortunately, I believe they're all gone now, but that was something that Jack had designed. And he also designed the Carillon Tower that's still there. So you see that mid-century modernism through the RBCM as well. And then it came to the mosaics in the fountain as well. And the marching orders about the importance of this as the sort of gravitational heart of the square was that they had to be visually strong enough to become a unifying symbol of the square and draw strong pedestrian attention and appeal to the sense of hearing and feeling as well as sight. And that's what I found that fountain has always done. No matter what time of the day or night that you're there, even if you're alone, there's that sense of another presence, I suppose, in a very comforting way. With the three monoliths, each one speaks to one different principle. One is youth, one is creation, and one is mortality. And I think safe to say that they have survived the test of time. In addition, the fountain was a gift from the three sister municipalities of Oak Bay, Esquimalt, and Saanich. And each one of those fins actually points directionally towards that particular jurisdiction. So I was particularly excited yesterday reading the story in the Times Colonist, as I call this breaking news. The new exhibition at the Royal BC Museum is on Stonehenge, and they are introducing some new to us research. And one of the things they were saying was that originally they had thought that Stonehenge had been built by the Druids, with all of this wonderful pagan ceremony and that kind of thing. But now they are saying it's far more likely that it evolved over time, and more importantly, involved all the people of Britain as tribes were unifying. So now I look at this. This is our regional tribes unifying. And at a time when it's sometimes difficult to bring different jurisdictions together in a cooperative way, what a wonderful, powerful symbol of intermunicipal respect and support. So I don't know if the British Museum is ready for our research, but maybe we could let them know about that too. And the final person that I will mention after we admire the infrastructure of what would have to be removed in order to put a splash park in this location rather than having a fountain, you can see how significant that structure was. And then finally, I just wanted to mention Herb Warren. Herb Warren was the director of parks for 40 years, beginning in 1930. And I say, if you look around the city and you see something beautiful horticulturally, think of Herb. I mean, the boulevard plantings, whether it's the cherry trees or the hawthorn trees, all of that came under Herb's direction. The hanging baskets came under Herb's direction. The knot garden that I showed earlier, that was part of Herb's contribution to Centennial Square. And he published the very first studies on boulevard plantings. And I just wonder, currently, do city staff refer to those as they are reworking all of our boulevards as well, and what's informing those decisions? But the one thing that I found was that Herb's background was in parks. And what had happened over time is there's no longer a Department of Parks, it's Parks and Recreation. And what I had found, generally speaking, the director of Parks and Recreation had come from a recreation background. And I think that's what we've lost in terms of horticultural design. And what about beauty? And that's a word I don't hear too often, and I think we should hear it more. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Pam. Thanks for that a fantastic overview of this incredible coming together of talent. I don't know what's more impressive, your ability to recall all this information or the information itself, but really interesting. Thank you.